Welcome into the Inside Bassmaster Podcast presented by Black Rifle Coffee Company, episode 151. Actually, I take that back, Kyle. We're off to a great start. Episode 152 of the podcast. We wrapped up the opens with the last podcast episode, and now we're putting a button on the Bassmaster Kayak Series, the Yamaha Rightwaters Bassmaster Kayak Series. They finished up their season just a few weeks ago. In the middle of all of those, you had the Nation wrapping up, you had the Opens wrapping up, College Bracket was just before that, and then the Kayak Series as well. So the tournament season, we've been saying this for a couple of weeks now, it's basically done. We have the team championship left, and we have Redfish Cup later this week. So you're on the road, headed to Redfish Cup now. I'm in the house getting ready to do live this week for it as well. But ending Kayak Series on a good note.
Yeah, I don't think I don't know how many times we've said this, but naturally, I don't think there's ever an end to this. This stretch of like 9 weeks or whatever it will have been after the Redfish Cup has stressed my brain to the maximum limit, I believe. Not necessarily from traveling or one specific thing, just constantly always being on top of the next thing. That's just kind of the way this sport is, and it's how bass is, and we stay on top of it, and it's a lot to handle. But yeah, like you said, exciting to get the kayak season over with. Not for the sake of just getting it done, but a very unique tournament to end the season. A few down the stretch that were really interesting. I just remember seeing on the schedule the last kayak tournament being in two things: one in October and two in Pennsylvania in October. And I was like, "What is going
Who
on
knows?
here?"
Yeah, it could be snow sledding.
Just, yeah, that's what I said. I was like, "Man, that doesn't seem right." And then getting to see the coverage from Mark Cisneros and see it all go down on Bassmaster.com, I was like, "Wow, that actually looks like really sick." It's a really cool place that I didn't know much about, and obviously later on we'll get into that as well. But yeah, some great tournaments down the stretch to finish off the season in the kayak series.
I love this time of the year because all of these different trails that are not the Elite Series are determining classic spots. Some of the final classic spots of the year are determined. We whittle that down. Also, I love this time of the year because we're hot in the middle of the NFL. Baseball's at the tail end, so now we can finally pay attention to what matters, the end of the playoffs. And then the NBA is starting, and we still have fishing going on, college football, everything's going on. And so before we get in our first guest of the day, Michael Cates, who was the Possum Kingdom winner, I got to give some love. The defending NBA champs, 1-0 last night, opening night. I'm happy about that as a longtime fan of the Nuggets. And you're sporting the gear too. It couldn't have been more perfect. Texas Rangers in the World Series. So it's a good time to be Ronnie Moore and Kyle Jessie, I guess, in terms of all sporting events. We're getting a little bit of relief from tournament coverage, and we get to enjoy, I think, with Razorback football, the Arizona Cardinals, and my ECU Pirate football, I think the Nuggets win has broken like 3 months where none of my favorite teams have won. So I'm all about it.
Well, that's what I'm hoping for as well. Obviously, I've been a lifelong Texas Rangers fan. Like I told you this like as soon as I met you. I think outside of like Razorback sports, it's the only other sport that I'm like incredibly passionate about, like keeping up with and have been my whole life. So, um, you know, since 2011, it's been real tough. But I mean, 2015 and 16 obviously had some good seasons. But as far as making deep playoff runs, it's been since I was, before I was even in high school. It's like ninth grade, eighth grade, time frame. So super exciting. And like you said, for the lack of success all the other teams I root for are having, especially just Razorbacks, football, it would definitely make up for it. I would trade a Rangers World Series for like 6 seasons of bad Razorback football. Like, and I mean that. I do not like I have not to this day. I have not like been able to like get past the 2011 World Series where the Rangers blew it in Game 6. So if the Rangers can pull it off, I think that will make up for all the bad football we've had to watch for Arkansas.
Well, let's just go ahead and add in our first guest of the podcast for the kayak series, Michael Cates. Not far from where your Texas Rangers play, Arlington, Texas. A little bit west of there was where Possum Kingdom was. It was the 4th stop of the season. We already did Gunnersville, the Kayak Classic at Chickamauga, and then we had Hartwell in the past podcast. And now we've got Michael Cates on for his Possum Kingdom victory. Kyle, like we mentioned, first guest of the podcast, Michael Cates from Texas. We're going to the Lone Star State, and that was where the fourth stop of the kayak series went this year, Possum Kingdom. I just love saying the name of that lake, Possum Kingdom, Possum Kingdom. Hopefully, it's in that Fort Worth metro area, a little bit west of there. And Michael, word through the grapevine is you have great success there. I'm not going to call it luck because when you do it more than once, it ends up being a trend. I heard Possum Kingdom's been pretty good to you over the years.
It has. I like that lake. It's good. It's full of fish. One thing, it's absolutely full of fish, so it makes it a little easier to target bigger fish. Not worried as much about just getting a bite.
Well, and I was going to say, go ahead, Kyle.
Go ahead, Ronnie.
Jump in. Okay, so the details of your win for the viewers at home. This was back in June, so you're part of the Winning Ways episode. We haven't forgotten about you. We waited for the other two events to be done. We do 3 winners in the same episode. You won with 210 inches. You had 109 inches and change on day 1 and 100 and change on day 2. Tell me what that to you equates to pounds and ounces wise for everyone else, because 110 inches is a really good day. Was that anchored by a really big one, or did you have all pretty similar fish?
Yeah, they were all big fish, man. Everyone. It was I had one real big one, which was it was a 2-footer, 24 inches.
Wow.
Then I had all of them within 20 to 22. Every one, man. They were all just about the same size. I went through a lot of fish to get that big, though. I probably caught 40, probably 40 both days to get that, curl up that many times. I think it would probably be close to 55 pounds.
Wow.
In a 2-day tournament, man.
Gosh, that is incredible.
Pretty close.
Probably upper 20s and then mid 20s for day 2. So that's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was amazing. It doesn't happen often like that for me.
So let's set it up. Obviously, Ronnie mentioned this tournament was in June, of course. Post-spawn, you're talking about Texas. It's certainly warm by that time. Just talk to us a little bit about, one, the lake itself, because it's not a lake that I think a ton of people are familiar with, just from the lack of national, big tournaments there previous to the last couple of kayak tournaments there. So set up the lake for us, kind of what it's like as far as like comparability to, and then, the kind of the stage of the fish we're in during the tournament.
Well, it's a riverine lake. It's on the Brazos River system, but our rivers don't flow much here, so it's not like what other parts of the country where we have flow. But it's a rocky lake. The upper end is a little bit turbid. The lower end is gin clear, 10 to 12 feet. And I was in the middle of the lake, and it's a very popular recreation lake. Docks everywhere, big boats, water skiers, you name it. And at that time of year, I'd actually never fished this part of the lake before the week prior to this tournament. It was right within the on limit. When it came off limits, I went. And I picked it because it's post-spawn and it has huge flats. There's 3 big, huge flats in this little area. And so, man, it was, I actually found those fish the week before the tournament. 6 days before the tournament, I found them, and they hung around the whole time. They were just on the edge of, on the very edge of some flats that dropped, went out to slow taper to like 40, 50 feet. And I found 2 steep spots where it tapered a little faster. And that's where all the big ones came from. 2 casts. I had 2 casts I could make and catch a big one.
That's kind of the perfect storm. We see that in some of those East Texas lakes, some of the West Texas lakes, and obviously Central Texas, but then also the Tennessee River. You get those offshore places. So you explained the flats out to deep water. And then when I was researching about your victory, it said a Carolina rig, which is a great bait for slowly dragging, probing offshore cover, and then a 6XD. For one, the first thing I thought about was, how difficult is it to sling a 6XD and get it down to the depth you want while in a kayak, managing boat positioning, wind? You've got it. It's hard enough sometimes making a good cast with a crankbait to that depth, in a big boat. So in a kayak, was there some difficulties? And had you gone through some other baits and realized these were the best two because I could be precise with casts a lot easier?
Through I love deep cranking. All my best memories of my life when I've had unbelievable days was deep cranking. And I quit when I went from a boat to a kayak for those reasons you just listed. I couldn't. It pulls the kayak to you. You can't get any depth. But now I have spot lock, man. So I just spot locked and threw out the back, and it was I mean, I had to go through too many fish with a worm or a Carolina rig to get a big one, but the bigger ones would eat the crankbait more regular. That's why I chose it. And at the end of about the last 2 hours left in the second day, my hand was just so cramped I couldn't throw it. That's when I started dragging, and they were biting every cast, man, right to the end. It was amazing.
Michael, you mentioned obviously you went from a boat to a kayak. Just kind of wondering from your perspective, one, how long you've been in the kayak game, and especially in tournaments, and then two, just what the growth has been like, just from the last handful of years that I've been, closely paying attention to it. It seems like it has grown so much. Could you just speak to that any?
Yeah, I think it was 2000 and summer 2012. I sold my boat and got a kayak immediately, and it was just a little. I just got something so I could get on the water, and
Sure.
I think the year, sometime during that next calendar year, somebody taught me that I met through the kayak world, taught me in the fishing tournaments, and man, it wasn't that big at the time. I was kind of late to the show. It was starting to grow, but I was kind of late to the show. And then within that next 5 years, man, it just blew into what it is today. And I don't know if there's any end in sight. It's still growing. I mean, I could fish in my state. I can fish a tournament every weekend of the entire year if I want to. I'm going to one this weekend, and I think every state's like that has bass. It's amazing. And I'm going to tell you, whenever I fish boat tournaments too, man, and whenever I do the math, my net's a lot better out of a kayak. The money. I mean, it's not $100,000, but the money's good. Where the bank account justifies it for sure.
Well, especially if you're as good as you are. I mean, trophies over your shoulder. For me and Kyle, no tournaments justify spending the cost. But
it doesn't matter for us.
Oh,
so what was it like for you to have such a big day one? Were you in the lead on day one? And how big of a lead? And then on day two, did you think at any point you might have given it away? If they're biting right up to the last second, did you wish, man, I wish I had another hour? Or if they're biting here, they've got to be biting elsewhere for other people right up to the buzzer?
Well, I was in the lead by a significant margin after day one. I mean, I had my best kayak tournament day of my life. I hope I was leading,
Yeah.
And it was a significant margin. But I'll tell you what, they sent the camera boat to me the next morning. And at 10 o'clock, I didn't have a bass, man. And the day previous, I stopped fishing by 9 o'clock. I mean, I had everything I had by 9 in the morning. So I was starting to sweat it a little bit. And I finally gave up on the spot, man, and just went to go get a limit. Well, ended up catching a limit by right at noon. I was in the lead though. My wife told me later I was in the lead, but I didn't know it at the time. So I had a small limit, and then I went back to the spot, man, and it was every cast from noon to 3. I mean, literally every cast I'd catch a fish, a good fish, and I'm not even sure it was happening so fast. I'm not even sure I put my 5 biggest ones in on day 2 because I had so many pictures, man. I couldn't, and I was running out of time. I was sweating, and I haven't even went back to look, but I had like 40 pictures of fish that all looked the same from that afternoon, man. And it was hard. And no cell service.
That's crazy. So no cell service. The process. So walk us through the process. You're a 51-year-old man. Maybe for the 21-year-old anglers that hatched, just the other day, it might be easier to keep track, tech savvy. What's that process like of finding the fish, catching the fish? Now you got to get it in the boat, put it on the board, do all those things. So tell me your process of that. Are you a guy that enters them as they happen, or all at the end of the day before, the deadline of entering. I think that's like, what is it, an hour after the tournament's done that you can enter your fish by
Yes,
before
sir.
they're DQ'd. So yeah, are you a wait till the end of the day guy and surprise everyone on there, or are you a as it happens?
Well, typically I am. I wait, but this I entered my fish at like 9 o'clock. I was done fishing that first morning at 9, so I went to the middle of the lake where I could get some service, and I sent them in. And I had one bad pitcher, and he DQ'd me on 122 incher, dude. So I'll go back across, set up on my spot. First cast, I catch a 22 incher to replace it. It was just, I knew then it was
Wow.
too much, man. That was just too much. But I typically do like to wait till I at least get a good limit, decent limit, and then I'll go, and that gives me the rest of the day if I mess something up to try to do something. But like at that lake, I couldn't. Man, I caught fish to the end, man. I couldn't stop and go. I had to go a long ways to get self service. I couldn't do it. So the second day, I had to sweat it, man. At the end, trying
Like,
to get self service, I had to
Steve,
be back in an hour.
yeah, can I just FaceTime you, Steve, and you can just see these as they happen live, because it's just going to be too much to put them
It
in.
was too much, man. It was the silliest thing ever. It never happens like that. I'll never see another day like that in the tournament. It just didn't happen that way. We get days like that here, not in the tournament.
There's something glorious about that. Like, you imagine your best day ever. You mentioned that first day being like, your best day out of a kayak you'd ever had. Like, set that up for us. Like, first thing, do you roll up? Is there like one specific incident where like you just know, one, it's going to be on, and two, you have a real shot at winning this thing? Like, walk through that situation with us when you get to the
Oh,
spot on day one.
I tell you exactly when I knew, man. When I knew it was going to be a banner day. My first cast, I got a backlash, and I dug it out. My next cast, I missed the mark. The third cast, I catch one. The fourth cast, I catch two. The fifth catch, I catch two on one cast. And I knew then it was two. And they weren't very big fish. But then I had another one it was a 4-pounder or so, and he had the back hook. So on that plug, and I pushed the button where I wouldn't pull the hook out of his mouth. He dives down. It gets real heavy, and a 7-pounder got on it, and I couldn't get him up into the net, man.
Gosh.
That was all within 15 minutes, and it was just crazy.
Well, if we ever have a Bassmaster Classic at Possum Kingdom in the month of June, like we did with Ray Roberts just a few years ago, I feel like people are going to refer to this podcast and be looking for that magical spot. So what has this win done for you? Had you fished Bassmaster kayak events yet? I know there's a lot of different trails that have opened, the sport up to bigger proportions, but is this the first Bassmaster event you had fished? And I don't want to be incorrect here, but do you get to fish in the classic for your victory? And if so, like, what's this win been like for you? Obviously the payday is good, but just the opportunity on the Bassmaster like platform.
Well, I got a blue trophy, man. I never, since I was a little kid, I'd like those blue trophies. So that in and of itself is awesome. But I did qualify for the classic, and I fished the classic before too. Not the classic. I fished the Bassmaster series before one time. I have a hard time traveling because of work. That's my thing. Otherwise, if I could afford a week or a month, I would do it. But I am qualified to go to it's 10 killer.
Yep.
This March, and I'm looking forward to that. I'll be there, Lord willing. I'll be there.
That'll be awesome. What do you do for a living, Michael? If we don't mind me asking, unless you're in the Secret Service, and then just don't tell me.
Not quite. I do air conditioning and heating work. I got a business, and nobody does work when I'm home, so I got to stay around. I like having a house.
Both of us do, no doubt. Even though I guess the bank owns my house, but I just they let me stay in it.
Same. Yeah, that's the way it is. That's the American way, man.
Last question I got for you. Obviously, you talked about 10 killer. Not too awfully far away from you. Obviously, they're in Oklahoma. How much prep have you done for that? And do you plan on going up there to scout the lake around, or what's that looking like for you?
Yes, I have a plan to go sometime this winter just to go look at it. Really, I like cranking, man, and I think that's what you know, I'm a flipper, a dragger, and a cranker, and I think if it's in the bushes, it'll be okay. Or if it's not, I'm just grind the crankbait off, bill off of a crankbait and see what happens, man.
Obviously not giving away any information here, but I've had the opportunity to fish 10 killer a lot,
Yeah.
having went to school in Fayetteville, and that is a really really fun lake, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys are capable of doing there.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. In my research, I didn't realize how prolific the bigger smallmouth are, man. I thought a smallmouth was a bonus, but it's the other way around, man. So I'm looking forward to that. Now that's something I don't get much of, smallmouth fishing.
There
That
are
would
some
be
good ones, that is for sure.
Michael, before we let you go, can you give us a rundown of what your kayak setup is? Some guys have multiple kayaks based on the body of water, but if your banner days are all offshore, you might have a nice platform. So what's been the bet? Have you switched since that original 2012, and what's your progression for your rig and setup and kind of, I guess, how many rods you carry with you, stuff like that?
Well, my kayak is a native Titan 13.5, whatever. It's the biggest, widest, stablest kayak they make. It's not very fast, but I have a XI3 trolling motor with spot lock and all that on it. So, and it's wide, man. I can take a lot of stuff, and I usually do. I usually got a dozen rods, and that's about my limit, is a dozen. But on those good days, like that day, I'd only have 4 or 5 because especially on day 2, those are the good days. But unfortunately, I generally carry the kitchen sink with me. I'm
Well,
going
Kyle,
now. It's a lot, man. It's too much.
Well, Kyle, we'll know at the every competitor will now know after this podcast, if Michael rolls up to 10 killer on for the classic and he's only got 3 or 4 rods, they better watch out.
Well, I hope that's the case. That would be nice.
Well, Michael, we appreciate you joining
nice.
us, man. Congratulations on your win. We hope to see you at the classic. Obviously, all of us will be there. We'll have we just had a meeting today. It is October 25th, and we had a meeting about where we're setting up the Bassmaster live set in Tulsa there for the classic at Grand. So we'll get to roll you through the stage as well, hopefully on that final day for the kayak series, and that'd be great. But appreciate you joining us, man. Congrats on your win at Possum Kingdom.
Thank you. Thank you for the time. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. One of our champions, Kyle, we know how hard it is to win a Bassmaster tournament. He's got his blue trophy. So huge accomplishment for Michael. And man, best day of kayak fishing ever, best day of fishing in general ever. What do you say, 55 pounds for 2 days? I mean, come on.
Yeah, when he said that made me stop for a minute. I was like, good grief, that is destroying them. And there's no question. I mean, obviously, it's not just Lake Fork. It's not just, Toledo Bend on the line. There are so many lakes in Texas that have the capability of doing that. I have tons of friends in the DFW area that fish and things of that nature. So they all say that it's not easy, but you find one of those magical spots on really any of those lakes. It seems like you're capable of doing that, but that's crazy just to find that one spot that obviously had them loaded like that. That's pretty phenomenal. I imagine that was complete chaos, if I had to guess.
Of every lake that we've ever had tournaments on in general, like any lake that there's been a bass tournament on, people will say you should have a classic here, you should have an elite here, you should have a classic here, and you get DMs of it. It's like, when you coming back to Gunnersville? And it's like, we're here every year. Like, what are you talking?
Yeah.
But the one overwhelming lake that I get in my DMs that is like, you guys need to come and do a big time Bassmaster event at. I mean, I get Texas Team Trail picks, I get local tournaments from people. Is Possum Kingdom. That is the most DM'd deal about it. And so who knows in the future what it could hold, but that is a fantastic body of water. I can't wait if we have live on there for 3 or 4 days for me to say Possum Kingdom that many times. I think I had Greg Hackney derailed. He said, I just want to know, was there a bunch of possums around? How did it become the kingdom of possums? He said that on Bass Live on FS1, and we got derailed for about 15 minutes on the name.
Yeah, one of my best friends, and Sam Metters, was my fishing partner in college. He used to bring it up to me all the time. This was even before I had ever even heard of the lake, and kept saying Possum Kingdom. I was like, what is Possum Kingdom? And then now, obviously, to see where from the time we were in college and he was telling me about it to now. It's like, well, it's gaining some traction quickly, that's for sure.
That's hilarious. Yeah. And now, Kyle, we get to change gears. And now we're headed over to Pennsylvania and the Susquehanna River. I don't want to pronounce the Q too much. We'll have to get the locals up there. We don't want to get them mad. Susquehanna, the Susky, as people call it. And we've got somebody who was kind of factored and expected and favorited to possibly win that event. Josh is joining us today after taking the title at that event. Josh, can you hear us?
Yeah, how are you guys doing?
We're doing good. First thing I got to ask you, man, say your last name for us because I've been avoiding saying it on the podcast this whole time. I said, yeah, Josh, our guy, is coming up next.
Yeah, sure. So it's pronounced Shrink. Oh, sorry. Getting a call here. You guys still there?
Yep.
Oh, sorry, I lost you on the video here. Sorry. So my last name is pronounced Chrenko. So you can imagine I got all kinds of terrible nicknames in high school from that. So, but yeah, like Chrenko, like it's spelled with a CH though.
Yes.
So yeah.
Well, Kyle, one thing we know is Josh didn't live up to his last name because he had the most inches when it came to the Susquehanna River, the final stop of the Yamaha Rightwaters Bassmaster Kayak Series presented by Tourney X. I got a feeling, Josh, that this was up in your neck of the woods, that you were somewhat of a favorite. You had been there before, and to come to fruition and win, and to do so, I believe, with pretty consistent days. Tell us about your week there.
Yeah, so it's not in my neck of the woods per se. I actually live in Indiana, so I'm quite the drive from the Susquehanna, about 9 hours to be exact. So, but I am a little bit of a smallmouth guru, I guess you could say. You can see I'm in my office right now. I own a company called Achigan, so we're the official brand of smallmouth bass. So I'm like, and I host a smallmouth podcast, so I'm kind of like known as like a hardcore smallmouth guy. If it's a largemouth, like I'm throwing it on the bank. Uh, but no, in all seriousness, I just love smallmouth fishing. So I had been to the Susquehanna quite a few times because it's like the Disneyland for smallmouth fishermen. If you guys haven't been, you should definitely go because it's one of my favorite places on earth. So it'd been the third time I've been there this year. So yeah.
The 9 hours is getting shorter and shorter every time you go, it seems like, because you're visiting there. But Kyle, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that was the one thing that, like, kind of threw me off. Is I'll be completely transparent in the fact that I didn't really know much of anything about the Susquehanna, um, and I didn't really know what to expect. But then seeing the photos and seeing some of the stuff Marcus Cisneros put on Bassmaster.com, I was like, this place looks like it was built for kayak fishing. And what I mean by that is, like, obviously we go to some of the places, the bigger lakes, and fishing out of a kayak may not be necessarily a big advantage, but it seemed like that place was just built for kayak fishing. So explain to me, what that was like. There's obviously a lot of current. Kind of set up what it was like fishing there for our viewers.
Yeah, the Susquehanna, words do not do it justice. It's like this place that until you go, you just can't like fathom what it's really like. It's it's been described as like a mile wide and a foot deep, which is a pretty good, like, concise way to put it. Like through the main stem, it literally is a mile from shore to shore. So it's like St. Lawrence width type of thing. It's like huge width. You can barely see across it. But most places you can jump out and like wade, like in the middle of the river. So there are obviously spots that are 10, 12 foot deep, but like average depth, it's similar to like Okeechobee or something. It's like just really, really shallow, like throughout. There's really not a lot of deep stuff. It's got a lot of current, so it sets up. I would say it sets up. You're fishing at kind of like a huge creek. Is really what it is. Like it's
Sure.
this huge creek, and when you first get out on it, it's like It's similar, like I said, Okeechobee, but like any place like that has a ton of cover, like all those like cypress tree lakes down in Louisiana and that like where it's like you look and everywhere looks like there should be a fish.
Sure.
This is what this place looks like. It's like there are boulders everywhere, there are runs everywhere, there are islands everywhere, there's grass everywhere. And to be honest, like there's pretty much fish everywhere you think there will be fish. There are so many smallmouth. I mean, if you don't, if you go there and you catch less than 50 a day, like you're probably not doing something right. Like it's just a ton of big smallmouth. So it's, like I said, it's one of the coolest places I've ever been. So
The visual that I get from it, Josh, is I used to go from Florida, where I was born, or North Carolina, where I lived most of my life. We'd go up north to Maryland to visit my grandparents, and we'd get on this place called Harper's Ferry, which is like West Virginia,
yep,
Maryland,
Virginia.
and it's the
Yep,
Shenandoah River. But I used to think it
yep,
was the Susquehanna River, but it looks very similar. Every turn that you see, there's just rapids, there's boulders. And so
yep.
how with such a vast place but all similar depths and things, how does someone go about choosing a spot, especially in the boat you guys are given, or use the equipment that you have? It's not like you can just pick up and go like 20 miles to the next spot. There's got to be a lot of strategy involved in selecting a portion of the river so you don't spend most of your time behind the steering wheel of your truck, or trying to troll against the current if you've headed somewhere you shouldn't have been.
Yeah, I mean it's tricky, because I fish. I have a jet boat that I fish out of a lot. Actually, the last couple of times I went to the Susky, I've taken my jet boat, and that's a lot better because you can just fire it up and go somewhere else. The kayak, you're and I don't fish with a motor in the kayak, so I'm like I have a inflatable Hobie, so I'm like pedaling everywhere, and no electronics, nothing like that. I'm just, I got something really light that I can kind of portage and take where I want. I can throw it on top of my Forerunner and head over to another spot. Um, as far as like where you fish there, you could have won that tournament in any given stretch. Like it isn't a place where like, oh, if you know this like secret place, like, oh, there's all these big fish. It's like anybody could have won it on any given stretch. There's just so many fish in that river. It's insane. But you kind of have to like break it down. I try to break it down kind of like a lake and just say like, okay, I'm going to concentrate in this particular area and like figure out in the fall specifically, you're trying to figure out like where these fish are kind of at in their migration. So they're starting to feed up for the winter. So they're kind of coming out of those like summer patterns where they're just spread out everywhere and they're starting to kind of bunch up, school up. And then they're really in prime feeding locations that are usually somewhat close to wintering holes, which when I went there at the beginning of October, I wasn't sure if they'd be doing that or not. And I found some fish that were like the very first kind of wave of group of fish that were moving into these feeding areas, and they were like the biggest. They were like the alpha dog fish that had moved into this area and were feeding. So that's kind of how I found the fish. And I fished, honestly, I fished pretty miserable for 2 days. Like I wanted to be out running and gunning and hitting the main river. I found a spot where these big fish were, I say stacked up. It wasn't, they were moving in and out of this area. And I basically fished this like tiny little spot for 2 days, which it was killing me inside to not be out running around, throwing topwater and stuff. But I stuck to my guns, and the strategy paid off. So yeah.
So obviously you mentioned that, a spot, was kind of important, obviously, to your success, but you mentioned that any portion of the river you feel like you could win. Is it a matter of, is there a bait selection you feel like? What is the difference between catching the average size fish and the above average size fish at that body of water?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think it's bait selection per se. It's really just where the big fish were setting up. And I know the guys that weren't doing what I was doing, we had like of course, like you guys know, tournaments, it never fails. something always happens between like when you practice and the tournament that like just throws you for a loop. Like it never fails. It's never just like, oh, everything, the weather stays the same and the water level stays the same. It's always something. In this particular one, we had like two things. One, a cold front moved in on day one, like big time. Like it was like, it went from being like 80 degrees to like 60, high, like within a day. And then there's this big inflatable dam on this river, which sounds crazy, but there is this dam that they inflate at the very top of the main stem, and it creates like this lake above the main stem where people can pontoon boats in. And well, at the end of the year, they deflate it to like basically let the fish, migrate up and down that dam. Well, just so happens they deflated it on
Wow.
2 o'clock on day one of the tournament. So they went from like I was looking at the gauges on on my the USGS gauges, and like man, this something's going on. Like this doesn't look the same. And I was trying to figure out what's going on. You know, when you're like it's like slowly changing and you can't quite put your finger on. It's like this something's changing with the spot. And I finally realized like the river's coming up. And I looked at the gauge, and by the time I got off the water on day one, it like almost tripled in flow. So it was like, yeah, it was like pushing a bunch of water. And on the Susky, when you get like a big flush of water like that, those fish go absolutely nuts. And they were, from what I was talking to guys that were fishing the tournament, and they were basically positioning, all the big fish were positioning on those islands, like at the very top of the islands. And if you figured that out, you were just busting them all day. There was one of the guys I was in the house with caught like 80 fish over 18 inches on the day two of the tournament. So they were just, you probably couldn't miss, honestly. And I was in that spot. My spot was kind of like this very specific area where these big fish were at, but there weren't a ton of them. I only caught 8 fish on day one and 9 on day two. So I was like, I wasn't catching a lot of fish, but every single one of them were like giants. So that's kind of how and I was throwing big swim baits to answer your question. Biggest I had in my box. So yeah.
Before we get into the bait talk a little bit more, because I'm intrigued by that, big baits with smallmouth and things like that. Obviously something that, people who don't fish for smallmouth wouldn't think to throw, but since you're all about the bronze, you would throw it. So yeah. give us the rundown though, your thought process as the end of day one comes to a close. You've had a good day. You hadn't got a bunch of bites, but now this whole change has happened. And was there something in your mind that's like, when the water flow does what it's going to do, they get to biting, I'm either not secure in my weight or my inches that I've caught day one, and I can easily be overtaken by someone's just magical day, or I'm losing confidence in only getting 8 bites, and I need to go and jump in with the groups and fish, more of the main drag than a little spot off of it. So was there some mental doubt there or reassurance based on the household that you're staying in?
So I led wire to wire in this tournament. So I kind of was like, I don't think there's any way I could have abandoned that area on day two. Like it just would, you know what I mean? It's like if I went back there and I didn't do well, like I kind of was like I could live with myself, because I'm like, hey, you don't leave fish to find fish. That's like the general rule of thumb. And I had fish and big ones, so I didn't necessarily consider not going there. But what I will say is, like, on day one, I was throwing like visual patterns where they weren't throwing a whole lot of vibration. Like the fish were visually seeing the bait and coming and eating it. But by the end of day two, not only the river came up a bunch, but it basically muddied up the whole river. So I went from having like 3 to 4 foot of visibility to like maybe like 6 inches at the end of day one. And like it was getting progressively muddier and muddier, but it didn't really muddy up until like the last hour of the day. I already had all my fish, so it didn't really bother me from that standpoint. But going into day two, I was like, I know I'm going to go back to this spot, but I don't think they're going to eat the same thing that they ate on day one. So I kind of was like, that kept me up at night a little bit, that I was like, all right, what am I going to do first thing in the morning on day 2. I'm going to get there. And my kind of test was I'm going to put my boot in the water as soon as I go to my ramp. I'm going to put my boot in the water. And if I can see my boot like 8 inches into the water and it's still dimly lit, like I'll be like pretty confident in what my plan is. If I put my boot in the water and I can't see it, then like we're going to have some issues. Because, if it gets muddy up to a certain point, like it's just hard to like have confidence a fish can even see. You got to drag it right in front of their face. And this area, there weren't like these like very specific targets I was throwing at. It was kind of a big wide area. So I was having to fan cast this area, and I didn't have these like, I knew exactly where the fish were sitting. So luckily I got to the spot on day 2 and I did see my boot, and I was like, all right, let's go. So
Kyle, I've never heard someone do the boot test, but we now know that that's a thing for kayak angling.
Yeah, for sure, man.
I think that. So obviously, Ronnie mentioned that we were going to get back into the bait talk itself. Said you were throwing some of the bigger swim baits you had. What were they specifically, if you want to get into it? And, how big are we talking? And was it a matching the hatch, or was it just to eliminate the smaller bites? What was the thought process behind, going with the bigger baits?
Yeah, so I kind of heard, first off, I'll say, like, I'm not like a big swim bait guy. Like, it's just not like, I think you're stupid if you don't at least have some and, have used them before. But I'm definitely not in the swim bait culture. Like, I got all these high-end swim baits. I have one little box that's like not even with my main tackle that I have my swim baits in, and I made sure I brought that. But I like didn't necessarily intend on it. I just heard whispers of guys like, "Oh, I'm catching them on this or that." So I was like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna at least bring them." And when I got to this area, I kind of approached it from a methodical standpoint. I would fish kind of across this area 2 or 3 times, and then I'd switch baits, fish across it 2 or 3 times, and I just keep cycling through patterns until I got something that something would eat. And I spent the first 2 hours of day 1 without a single bite. And I ended up tying on a 6-inch bull shad, which is like, it's the original, resin bull shads. And that's like one swim bait I have caught fish on. And I was like, I know that these things will hunt. So I tied it on, and like, I smoked 3 fish like pretty quick on it. So I was like, all right, like I got something here. I got my 4th fish on it. And then so it was like probably within like an hour I had 4 good ones, like real good ones. Like for boat guys, like these are like 4-pounders. Like these are big smallmouth.
Boat guys. And I love it.
Yeah, they go by weight. So I probably had one that would have went 5 in that tournament. For a river smallmouth, it's freaking giant. But so I was throwing that bull shed, and I hooked into what I thought was a catfish. This spot, that's why there's only big fish in there. There's like huge catfish in that river. There's muskie. There's all kinds of stuff. Like this area, if you're like 15-inch smallmouth, dude, you're getting eaten. Like you're not gonna hang in this spot. Well, I hooked what I thought was a big flathead, and I saw it kind of swim under my kayak. I'm like, oh my God, this thing's huge. I don't know what this is. Push my button. I'm like letting this thing run, and dude, a freaking 48, 50-inch muskie comes jumping out of the water, like bull shad hanging out of its mouth. I'm like freaking out. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, the only thing I'm thinking about is like, gotta get this bull shad somehow. I gotta get this bull shad back. And I fight this thing for like 5 minutes, dude. I mean, it's like just taking me, it's pulling my kayak. I'm like pedaling backwards, trying to like drag. I was trying to get to this little island because I was like, if I can just get to this island, I can at least like beach it somehow. And it jumped like a 3rd time and just sliced my fluoro leader, like done. Bull shad's gone. I got 4 fish, so I'm heartbroken, dude. I'm like, oh my God, I can't. I have no other swim baits like that.
Yeah, how do I make this mag draft jointed?
yeah, exactly. I had some like B.A.S. waivers that was the closest thing I had. But like a glide bait just doesn't have the same like movement that those bull shads do.
Sure.
It's a lot like bigger. Like,
Yeah.
you know, that bull shad's got a real tight, you know, movement to it. So I was kind of like, all right. So I threw a glide bait for like 2 hours, dude. I didn't get a bite. So I'm sitting here with 4 fish. My, you know, bait's gone. Dude, I was a wreck. Like mentally, I was like thinking about if I was even gonna like fish day two. Like I was like, am I if I go with 4 fish, dude, like I'm gone. Like there's no way. So I decided to kind of get my wits about me. I pulled off and onto that island and retied. I went through my swim bait box and I had a mag slow. If you guys are familiar with it, it's like a mag draft, but it's like a little bit different tail on
Got
it.
got
And
the feather on it too on the bottom.
yep,
Yep.
yep, has the feather on it. And I tied that on, and dude, it was like I threw 3 casts at that thing and smoked a 20. So I was like, well, I got my 5th fish, and then I ended up upgrading a couple more times with that mag draft or mag slow, which is, you know, that 5th fish was like, dude, it literally was like the biggest sigh of relief I've ever let out in my entire life. Because I didn't look at the leaderboard all day. Like I didn't know what other guys were doing. I just knew I had 4 big ones. And when I finally got that 5th one, I uploaded all of them, and then I was like in first. So I was like, all right, you know. So that was day one. So do you guys want me to stop here or keep going for day two?
Well, we need
I
to
do want
pause
to ask.
and tell Buka he needs to hook this
Yeah.
one up. Buka.
I was
Buka.
gonna
Yeah.
ask two questions. Have you bought any more
Yeah.
bull shad since? And two, if you could say something to that muskie right now, what would you tell him?
Yeah, dude. I don't have any other bull shads, unfortunately. Yeah, I was gonna order a couple. Dude,
Don't
you know,
tell
when
us
you
it's a
take a
money
week off
thing.
work to go
Don't
fish a
tell us it's
tournament,
a
you get
money
slammed.
thing.
No,
You know,
no, definitely not. I'm more than happily will spend $50 on a swim bait, but um, so the muskie thing, dude, would have been awesome to catch. Like I was like, I mean, that was the biggest muskie I've ever seen in my life. Like, and I'm not a muskie guy at all, but I've caught a
Sure.
handful of them smallmouth fishing, and you know the muskie things like I was like, oh, this is any other time would have been the
Right.
cool thing, but like right now, like not right now, dude. Like, did you really have to eat this right now? Knew I wasn't gonna get that thing in. It was
If
so
you were fun
big.
fishing, it'd be like, oh heck yeah, it's a giant muskie.
Oh, dude. Yeah, I would have been like, this is awesome. And it wasn't just any muskie, dude. I'm telling you, it was like I have a big hoop net that I use. Like a buddy of mine owns this net company. You guys should check them out. They make nets out of recycled hockey sticks. It's
oh
really
yeah.
they're
Gussie
awesome.
posted about it.
Well, broken. Yeah. My buddy owns that company, but he had hooked me up with this brand new net. I just hadn't had a really big hoop on it. And like, dude, I was like, there's no way this thing is not, there's not a chance this thing is going in this net. So I didn't even think of that. It was that big. Like it was tall, it was long. Like, dude, it was a giant. But I just knew it was so big. I was like, dude, there's no way that I'm getting this thing in. Like it just wasn't happening. So it was just I was hanging on, waiting on it to either give up or break me off, and it broke me off. So yeah.
Unreal. Yeah, go into day two for us because, like we said, you know, you led wire to wire, but there were so many things that changed. You did the boot test, and then did the mag slow, you know, work for you on day two, or did you have to adjust once again?
So I actually completely shifted gears on day two, and it was more like uh, just kind of relying on my experience and being on that river a few times. There's like 2 baits on the Susky that like have a little, you know, it's like I don't know. I think uh red crankbaits used to be big on like fork for a long time. That was like what guys like, you know, there's like certain baits on certain bodies of water where guys are like, oh yeah, I throw this. Jackhammers and whopper poppers on the Susky for whatever reason they have this reputation. And I love throwing a jackhammer, especially when it's muddy. Like so it was
So does
muddy and that
Ronnie.
yeah, like jackhammers are honestly jackhammers just like big fish baits, dude. They are big fish. They just for whatever reason big fish like jackhammers, and I had there was enough color on the water. where I was like, all right, this is like, it was probably somewhere about 10 to 12 inches of visibility. So not like super muddy, but it was like chalk, you know, it's kind of like dirty. And I was like, all right, dude, I'm going to go throw this jackhammer all day. Like I had my color is, I think it's hot crawl is what I use. Um, kind of like, and I'm trying to think what I had on the back of it. Oh, that new Berkeley, like chatterbait trailer. I can't remember what they're called, but
Power Stinger.
It's pretty big profile. Yeah, half ounce jackhammer. But that trailer is pretty big profile. And dude, I just threw it all day. I literally didn't throw anything else the entire day, and I had 5 by like 9 o'clock. So like I caught them pretty early, which was a huge sigh of relief from the day before. Yeah, jackhammer all day, and I threw that thing, dude. Jesus, I threw that thing. I mean, my arm is. I'm still having carpal tunnel conditions from that day, dude. I was throwing it so much. But yeah, man, it was, and they were choking it. Like when they hit it, like it was all the way at the back of their throat, all up in that cartilage. Like there was no getting off. I did break off an absolute giant, the very first fish on day 2. I don't even know how. My braid, I had 30-pound braid on, snapped, and I was like, oh, that was another musk. You know, my jackhammer hanging out of its mouth. So, but other than that, I didn't miss a single fish, which was like, that's what always happens to me during tournaments. I lose big fish. You know, it's like every guy knows, every tournament fisherman knows about that. But I didn't lose any fish this tournament besides that one, and that's, you know, stars kind of aligned. So,
Hey, Kyle,
yeah.
you want to go to the Susquehanna with me and throw chatterbaits?
Yeah, no, that sounds like plenty of fun. Dude, one thing I did notice when I read the story about the tournament, of course, when it happened was, you mentioned in there that you're not a big national tournament guy. One, was it just a decision because it was on the Susky and you wanted to fish there that you want to jump into this tournament? And then two, has this win kind of propelled your thinking to where maybe take a bigger jump and fish more national tournaments?
Yeah, it definitely gets me thinking about it more, especially when you get a big check and a blue trophy. It's like I want to do that again. But I will say this, like I fish all my locals, like kayak series around here, and I do pretty well. Like I think it's like my 4th win of the year that from tournaments, and I just don't. I own 2 businesses, and I have 2 girls at home and a wife, and like it's tough for me to like travel to, like when I travel, I'm usually fun fishing. A tournament just takes up so much time
Sure.
if you do it right because you have to go practice and then fish a tournament. It's expensive. You got to get a place to stay and all that. Um, I usually try to fish one national tournament a year. I started that last year, so I fished the Susky last year here, and it was I didn't do that well, and I was really salty about last year because I was like, I know I'm better than 50th place or whatever I got. So this next year, I was kind of like, I'm going to go back and fish it again. And I was prepared this time. I was doing research, and I didn't go with a bunch of buddies. I went with buddies last time, and they were all wanting to fish together and stuff. And like in a tournament, like you really have to like lone wolf it if you want to do well. You can't be compromising your put-ins and your locations with buddies. But yeah, as far as like, I would fish more. I'm just not like, honestly, I'm not a big lake guy. Like I fish lakes all grown up. I fished out of a bass boat, tournaments and stuff growing up, and I got into rivers, and it's just so much more fun. I don't know if it's like, yeah, it's just like, I mean, dude, you're just catching fish, and you getting visual eats all day, catch them on buzzbaits and flukes and jackhammers and stuff like that. Like, I don't want to be sitting in the middle of a lake in 40 foot of water looking at live scope, with the Ned Rager drop shot. Like, it's just not like that fun to me. And there's only so many natural tournaments that are in those kind of places. So the only other one I did think about going to the New River this year. I think the Hobie series went there. I was going to do that, and I I had to pick between the two, and the Susky won out. So yeah, and I am going to fish the Classic. And there is a river that goes into that lake. So
who knows the level
tend to
in
think I'm gonna
late March. We'll see. But yeah, all I heard from that, Kyle, was that rivers are easier than lakes, and he likes rivers. That's all I heard. That's all I heard. You can power fish all day. You don't have to work hard. You can just enjoy it and do good things. I agree with you. And me and Kyle, the lower unit on my boat, the old lower unit, shows that I try to do the same thing you guys do in kayaks, but in my bass boat, and that's not always the best thing. So tell us a little bit. I was looking at your Instagram account as well, the About the Bronze account, and I saw an orange smallmouth. Can you tell us that story about the orange smallmouth before we let you go?
Yeah. Sort of like a fish of destiny, man. I'm like, kind of knows like the smallmouth guy or whatever. And I was out fishing the Muskegon River in Michigan. It's actually a big, like, guys fishing for steelhead and salmon. It's a big salmon river. But I'm like the only idiot out there fishing for smallmouth. So every time we're out there during like a salmon run, guys are like, "What are you doing? Why are you fishing over there?" I'm like, I'm a smallmouth guy. But I had my jet boat there, and we were first fish of the day, man. I went out with my brother and it was on a buzzbait, and I saw the fish come up and eat it. I was like, "What in the world is that?" And I'm like reeling it in and get it up, and it's like, dude, this is a smallmouth. Like, I've never seen anything like this before, and it was it had a condition called xanthism, which is like where the pigments turn yellow, but because the smallmouth is brown, that yellow basically comes out as an orange color. And this fish was like the perfect, like, there weren't a bunch of spots on it stuff. It was like one of those smallmouth that are kind of like just straight bronze, like sandy. So the whole thing was like bright orange. And like, if you've seen a picture of it, you understand. It's like, it looked like a straight up goldfish. Like, I mean, there was no other way to say it. Like, it was like, yeah, it was wild. So I called some buddies of mine. One of the, I have a buddy who's a biologist, and I called him and sent him a picture of it, and he's like immediately like, "Oh, yeah, that's a xanthic smallmouth." He's like, "I've never seen one like that." He's like, "It's a 1 in a million fish." So yeah, I posted it and ended up, the local news called me and interviewed me. Yeah, you can tell on that thing. It was like glowing orange. So yeah, it was an awesome thing. But yeah, it's probably just because I smallmouth fish so much, or just a matter of time before I caught some weird smallmouth like that. So it's definitely cool. So
that's awesome. Kyle, you got anything for Josh before we let him go?
I do not, man. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been a blast. And once again, congrats on your big win. And we look forward to seeing you down there in Oklahoma.
Yeah, if you guys want to hit up the Susky for a pleasure trip, whatever, let me know. I'll give you some places to go. And let me tell you something. You will not regret it. It will probably be one of the most fun fishing you've ever had. It's wild place. So highly recommend.
That's awesome. We'll get the real dots, Kyle. He'll send us the dots as long as we promise not to bring a GoPro, and we have to blur out the backgrounds or what I would do is take a good photo where you don't have to blur the backgrounds. I am so tired of blurred backgrounds, but we'll do that. The only other thing I have to ask you, Josh, is I know that we're largemouth guys for the first half of the elite season, and then we'll become smallmouth guys at the end. But why don't you hook some brothers up with some smallmouth gear? If we have to get in the right train of mind. I'm just trying. I don't know. I mean, throw me a smallmouth hat.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys send me your addresses for sure. I will hook you up with some Achigan gear, which Achigan is the Algonquin word for smallmouth, if you're wondering about that. It translates to one which fights. So we're big smallmouth guys here. That's what we do. And I'll also send you guys some badass stuff if you send me your address. So
we can do it, man. That's
we
awesome.
can't do a smallmouth
right.
podcast without having the official gear of smallmouth. So awesome, Josh. Appreciate you joining
Heck
us.
yeah.
And congrats on your win. Awesome. We'll be able to see you at 10 Killer when me and Kyle are both in the Tulsa area for the classic. And man, you'll be one to watch as well. So thank you for joining us.
Awesome, man. It was a pleasure, guys.
Josh Chrenko did not shrink at the Susky, Kyle. Took the title. And he is the last guest of the day to wrap up the podcast for the episode 152, the Inside Bassmaster Podcast, presented by Black Rifle Coffee Company. Really cool place. We got some awesome rivers that are featured on some of these kayak events that we'll never see an Elite Series event on. We'll never see an Open. And we get to see them because it's a different way of fishing. And I agree. I don't discriminate. I'm just more uncomfortable with maybe fishing out of a kayak, but I don't discriminate against their tournaments because they definitely show us some cool playing fields and some different ways of catching them for sure.
Yeah, there's no question. Like I mentioned, right off the bat in this podcast, like I didn't really know much of anything about this body of water, and then once I started seeing it and seeing, what it looked like and the way these guys were fishing, and it was just like, golly, the place looks really neat and really cool, and obviously he did an outstanding job explaining, what that place is like, and obviously being a smallmouth guru like he is, certainly seems like it fits his bill perfectly.
That's fantastic. Like we said, we got knocked the podcast out today. We got to talk to Michael Cates, and then we got to talk to Josh Chrenko. We did not get to talk to Tyler Cole. Hopefully, we'll maybe be able to set that up more in the off season. Not quite sure what happened there, but glad to have a couple of our champions. We'll get to see all of these guys on the Winning Ways podcast from the first episode we did a couple months ago, this episode, and then we'll obviously in the next podcast episode about the kayak series, we will have the 3 AOY guys, number 1, 2, and 3 in the AOY for the kayak series this year. We'll get to go and see how their whole years went. But Kyle, appreciate you joining me on the road. We will do Redfish Cup live. If you like species that are not bass and see some bass anglers tackle them, it's on a familiar playing field, Winyah Bay in South Carolina. We've seen Bassmaster Elite Series events there. We had some guys who were looking for bass, like Justin Atkins, catching they're looking for redfish this time, but they're still catching bass, and they're like, what is this trash fish? I'm looking for redfish this time, and I'm catching bass. So we'll get to change the gears this weekend. We got 2 more Bassmaster events, the Redfish Cup this weekend, and then we've got the team championship. So Kyle, appreciate you joining us. We will see you in the next one, bud.